the younger people both don't have the experience of being bombed so heavily from the skies, nor do they have any real understanding of how it can all end. What other Iran can there be? So they tend to be really quite fragile, I'd say. I mean, I don't want to be patronising.
Well, no, I mean,
none of us know what we would be like under those circumstances.
Exactly.
But they say, what is our future? What is our future now? What is the future for our children? And the children we have yet to bear.
So Keir Starmer did hold a press conference about an hour ago at Downing Street, and during that he says the UK is in a heightened state of readiness and was prepared for the conflict in the Middle East.
Throughout January and February, we were moving defensive assets to Cyprus and Qatar. Fighter jets, air defence missiles, advanced radar and systems to take down drones, to ensure we were in a heightened state of readiness in advance of any conflict beginning. When the strikes began on Saturday, we immediately put those jets into the sky.
Israel and Iran continue to exchange missile and air attacks today. Warning sirens have sounded over Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, while explosions have caused widespread damage in Tehran. The Israeli Defense Forces are also attacking the Iranian-allied Hezbollah militia in Lebanon. The UAE says it's intercepted dozens of missiles and drones, while explosions have been reported in Qatar, Bahrain and Azerbaijan today. Now, thousands of people are on the move in Iran, people desperate to get away from the bombing, of course. And the Times correspondent Richard Spencer is on the Turkey-Iran border, where people have been queuing to get out of Iran, but also, it has to be said, to get back in as well. Richard Spencer, tell us about the scenes you've seen at the border.
So the border, it's in a very dramatic location, right up in the mountains on the border between Turkey and Iran, snow-covered mountains, and otherwise really quite beautiful, apart from, what's going on behind those mountains, where we know there is intense bombing. And indeed, some of the people coming out of Iran yesterday described having narrowly evaded bombing on the roads as they came north from Tehran to the border. One woman gave a very dramatic account of a factory being hit just as she was passing by a missile from Israeli or American missile. And she was shaking as she crossed the border, and this must have been about 12 hours later, I guess, from when that incident happened. Obviously, people are trying to leave. People are trying to get away from the bombing. People, particularly obviously people with visas or dual nationals who have passports enabling them to get out. It's quite difficult. The Iranians are not making it easy for those who want to leave. Apparently, we were told missiles hit an immigration building or part of the Interior Ministry, I guess, knocking out all the immigration servers. So border guards were sort of ringing through passport details to check against a database of people who were banned from leaving. But there were people leaving, and they told us these stories. And obviously, people outside were trying to get back in to see their families. The internet and phone lines to the outside world are cut, so they were literally had not heard from their families since the start of the bombing and were terrified as to what might have happened to them.
Well, I hope lots of people will now go and find your piece on thetimes.com, Richard. Perhaps they've already read it, but I was really struck in that article, not just by the stories of the people trying to get out, but by those stories of people trying to get back in because they realise that their place is with their families now. Tell us about them.
I think the point one makes is that these terrible events anywhere in the world, obviously, but particularly in the Middle East, they really present very difficult choices to everyone. I mean, we often see in Britain the end result of those choices when people fleeing these war zones end up taking the boats across the Channel, which is, of course, a difficult choice in itself, given the dangers. But before that, there are all these difficult questions of, do you stay with your families? Do you try and take your families away and then, risk never going home again? I've met people regularly on borders across the Middle East in the last decade, 15 years, who left home for 2 weeks because there was fighting, thought they'd be back, and literally 10 years later they still haven't been able to go back to their homes, their towns, their countries. So that's a great risk. And again, as I say, from the other people, these are mainly migrant workers, people who go abroad because the economy is so terrible in Iran. Working abroad, one man had left his wife and 4 children back home in the city of Urmia in Iran, and he was working on a building site in Turkey. And he said, "Oh, I couldn't be away. I had to be with my wife. I had to be with my children. I couldn't sit in Turkey anymore, not knowing what was happening to them." Entirely understandable point of view, obviously. But he said, when I get there, I have no idea how I'm going to provide for them because I don't have a job. There are no jobs. And if there were, how would you get a job at a time like this? So how do I feed my children once I've gone back to them? These are terrible choices people have to make.
Yes, and some of the older people in Iran will have already endured the Iran-Iraq war, which I always forget. It went on for nearly a decade, didn't it, that?
Yeah, the timescales, I mean, maybe it's because I'm getting older, but, timescales sort of, you lose track of these things. I mean, it seems such a distant past, the Iran-Iraq war, because since then we've had 2 wars in which Britain was involved in Iraq in 1991 and 2003. We've had the whole chaos of the Arab Spring, another war in Iraq to fight ISIS. And yet it's not that long ago. I mean, these people my age were already adults by the time the war finished. And they have very vivid memories of Iraqi missiles landing in Tehran and other cities. So they have been through it before. And so the older people tend to be a little bit more philosophical, shall we say, about what's happening. And it's the younger people really who they both have grown up under this regime and can see no end to it. They can see no end to the whatever their political opinions, they can see no end to the suffering, the sanctions, the attrition, the regime crackdowns, shooting at protesters, and these bouts of bombing and fighting. Iran, of course, has sent its own men off to fight in wars in the Arab Spring with Hezbollah, with the Syrian regime, the Assad regime. So the younger people both don't have the experience of being bombed so heavily from the skies, nor do they have any real understanding of how it can all end, what other Iran can there be. So they tend to be really quite fragile, I'd say. I mean, I don't want to be patronising.
Well, no, I mean,
none of us know what we would be like under those circumstances.
Exactly.
But they say, what is our future? What is our future now? What is the future for our children? And the children we have yet to bear.
Yeah, and the chance of regime change. I really understand that you're not in Tehran, which is where I suppose the action in that area would probably have to take place. But the idea that this would happen quickly, that perhaps this was something the Trump administration had hoped for. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you get these incredibly contradictory messages out of the White House all the time, and we have had all week about even whether he wants regime change. I mean, I think Trump said it would be nice if it happened, but on the other hand, it might be better if someone from within the regime took over. Or he said from within Iran, which effectively means, I guess, from within the regime. We don't know what he really wants. Israel clearly wants a weaker Iran, one that isn't able to threaten it, doesn't probably care quite so much about the political complexion of the regime after this is over. I don't think anyone ever goes on the streets when there are F-35s flying overhead. You'll be pretty crazy to do so. And judging by my colleague Gabriel Venega's report, who was talking to people in Tehran via satellite link over the last few days, there is very tough security in the streets. With the Basij, which is the Revolutionary Guard police force, have set up checkpoints everywhere. There's really not much incentive to try and topple the regime from the streets. The opposition is unarmed largely in Iran, apart from a couple of the separatist movements, but they're right at the fringes of Iran in the far northwest. near where I am or in the far east of the country. I think if there's going to be regime change, it's going to be more like a internal coup within the, say the Revolutionary Guard or the clerical establishment to appoint a new type of leader who will do a deal with the Americans. But again, there is no sign of that at the moment.
And just a brief word about the possibility of arming some Kurdish rebel groups. Could that happen?
It obviously could. The CIA clearly have the ability to do that. They've done that in the past with opposition movements in the Middle East. They've done it with Kurdish movements. Obviously, I mean, the Kurds have historically been allies to the West in many different ways in the Middle East. The Peshmerga, the Kurdish forces in Iraqi Kurdistan. They have a semi-autonomous republic, partly thanks to Western backing, and of course the offshoot of the PKK that is the main armed group in the Kurdish parts of northern Syria were all our allies in the fight against ISIS. It often hasn't turned out particularly well for them. They are kind of expendable, as it's proved with the Kurds in Syria, where the White House has sided basically with the new regime in Damascus rather than with the Kurds, trying to organize some sort of compromise between them. I think with Iran it's very difficult. I mean, the Kurdish. The armed Kurdish groups are much smaller as a portion of the Kurdish population in Iran. Without getting too sort of ethno-nationalist about it, the Kurds are much more closely related in terms of, say, language group to and history to the Persians in Iran than they are, say, to the Turks or the Arabs. It's much more greater history of hostility between Kurds and Turks and Kurds and Arabs than between Kurds and Persians. It wouldn't be very popular, I think, amongst most Iranians, even the ones who are hostile to the regime, to have a separatist armed Kurdish insurrection in the northwest, and what that would mean for the rest of Turkey is very unclear. Kurds are about 10, maximum 15% of the Iranian population, and they are mostly in the far north.
Richard, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. That's the Times correspondent Richard Spencer. He is on the border between Turkey and Iran. I hope you found that helpful. I know I did. Let's bring in Mehran Kamrava, who's a professor of government specialising in Iran. He is based at Georgetown University in Qatar. Professor, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Can you tell us really what life in Qatar has been like for the last couple of days, and what has the public reaction been to everything going on?
Life in Qatar has come to a standstill for the last 4 or 5 days. We've been under a shelter-in-place order, and except for necessities, most people are staying indoors. This is one of the safest cities in the world. Qatar is one of the safest countries. I live in Doha, and that safety and tranquility has been shattered. That sense of comfort has been shattered by loud explosions overhead. Most nights there have been explosions. Last night we actually managed to sleep through the night, but earlier today, about 2 hours ago, there were a series of explosions. It's now about 6 p.m. local time, so something around 4:30. I was actually, and a little earlier, I was in a Zoom meeting. Everything now has again, like the days of COVID, has moved to Zoom here in this part of the world. I was in a Zoom meeting and everyone was frazzled. So this is not something that the local population is used to, this level of tension and uncertainty.
Do you know who or what is giving the orders in Tehran right now?
Well, we do know that before he was killed, Khamenei had said he wants 4 levels of successors to the different key institutions of the Islamic Republic. And so I spoke to someone earlier in Tehran today. Seemed like the Revolutionary Guard is firmly in control of the military, and the various institutions of the state are operating as per normal. And so, one thing to keep in mind about Islamic Republic is that it has been very good at crisis management over the last 40 some odd years. It has really been lousy at management. But in times of crisis, it has been able to muddle or manage through various crises. Some of them, like this one, existential ones in the past.
So I think there were reports earlier in the week about a real discord between the Iranian army and the Revolutionary Guard and the potential for real trouble there. But you don't know anything about that, or that was simply a rumour that turned out to be just a rumour?
I don't know anything about it. I've never heard of it, in fact, and I follow events there very closely, and I'm in touch with people there as often as possible. So I would tend to believe, at least for my own analysis, that that's a rumor rather than fact.
So we've just been listening to our own Prime Minister Keir Starmer giving a press conference in which he acknowledged that he simply didn't know how long this was going to go on for, but it could be quite some time. What's your assessment?
Well, the Iranian government has long prepared itself for a prolonged conflict. And the assumption among Iranian leaders is that Iran has a much higher threshold for pain than either Israel or the United States or America's regional allies and friends. And so what we have are two very different assumptions about this war. The Americans and the Israelis want a quick and decisive victory, and the Iranians want, if not necessarily a war of attrition, but a prolonged conflict through which they can grind down American resolve. So how long this is going to last depends on, a number of different factors. If the Iranians can have their way, it's going to go on for a while. If the Americans can have their way, it'll be a quick and decisive victory. I think it's also important to remember that Donald Trump has been very deliberately unpredictable. And so if he wanted to, tomorrow he could declare victory and say, we won and the hostilities are over.
Yep.
Or he could drag this on, as he said, 4 to 5 weeks.
Thank you. Very sobering. That's Professor of Government, Professor Mehran Kamrava. He is based at Georgetown University in Qatar.